I'll start by just thanking you for coming, Emily. We really appreciate. I think I reached out on Saturday or Sunday, and here we are. So that's pretty good turnaround. Um, and I think a lot of us have aching hearts watching the world hurt so much. Um, and so for tonight, we haven't been recording any of our calls. And I know that this is maybe when we get to the discussion part, some sensitive information. But what I have done is talk to Emily about recording this first portion when she's talking to us. And then I'll stop the recording so that nobody feels hesitant to participate in the conversation. But then Emily and I will listen to the recording of the first part and decide whether or not we will be sharing it with the alumni. Plus, it will help her prepare for her doing this thing all over again tomorrow night. So
thanks all to you, Allie.
Without further ado, Emily will talk probably for about 30 minutes, and Brady will probably be chiming in with her. And then we'll go into some kind of conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Allie. It's so great to be here and see all of your faces, the faces that I can see. For those of you who I haven't yet met, I'm Emily. I'm from C5. I'm a former organizer. That's my background. And I'm a 22 plus year student of anti-racist work. And so grateful to be here to do this healing work with everyone. And even in the process of trying to think about putting this together, I fell into some mistakes and I really learned things. And so I learn every day. Even after 22 years, I continue to learn and grow every day in this respect. And so thank you again for having me. I'm actually going to talk for about 10 minutes, hopefully, and then Brady's going to go over a few things, and then hopefully we'll open up into a discussion. And then if we have time, I'd like to do some brainstorming and around some concrete actions that people can take. And for anyone who's interested, I would like to offer a non-denominational closing prayer. And so feel free to check out, no hard feelings, but if you want to stay on, that's sort of the agenda. I don't know if we have any, I do know, for all the Buddhists or people who are familiar with Buddhism, there's one concept that really helps me when approaching this work, and that is the don't know mind, or beginner's mind. And I think that's a really helpful way for us white folks to come in a way that we're ready to learn, and also hopefully in a way that's compassionate with ourselves and with others, especially with other white people who are learning and growing. So I would offer that as sort of a good mind frame to start from. The very first thing I wanted to do is answer a fantastic question that we get every time we do this work, and that is, when we are talking about racism, what the hell is a white woman doing here talking to us about racism? Fantastic question. Thank you for asking it. 100% of the content that we are going to be offering tonight comes from an organization called the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. They are the grandfathers of anti-racism. Almost everything that you will find in this sphere related to undoing racism and anti-racism work is at least a partial or full ripoff of their work, oftentimes without credit or permission. But they were founded in 1980, and I think I said that already, in New Orleans, and their undoing institutionalized racism training is the framework that I have seen become more and more and more adopted across the country, within government, within social services, within social justice work, and hopefully one day within businesses. So within that framework, the People's Institute teaches that the role of white folks in racial justice is to work with other white folks to educate and organize white people for racial justice. And so this is by design, us being white people talking to other white people. And we could maybe have like 5 calls on why this is so important, this very topic. I'm happy to delve more into it, but this is absolutely by design, because for without saying too much more, I'll say it's because we do not want to further burden people of color and make them do our work for us. So with that being said, some of the highlights of the People's Institute framework, which I think are particularly beneficial, is the focus on institutional change. So we are not, we don't do this work for our intellectual development. We do not do this work so we can go to cocktail parties and say the right things or post the right things on social media. This framework and this analysis and this prescription is meant so that we can go back into our families, into our communities, into our institutions, and enact white allyship for racial justice. So what Brady and I are going to be doing is we're hopefully going to be telling you some things and then telling you why we're telling them, because the goal is for all of you to be sharing this information with your networks at some point, hopefully soon. They do a 2-day training. That's sort of the bedrock of their framework, their analysis. And I cannot encourage people to do it enough. I've done it 3 times. And it's like taking the red pill in the Matrix. You will never think about the world again in the same way, and it's extremely powerful. So I highly encourage everyone to do that. Brady and I are not trainers. This is not a training. We're trying to do some highlights and some tips, but please do that. But it's also not the only way to become a good anti-racist ally. And we are going to be providing some resources that I will post to the channel or the new channel. Probably tomorrow, because I haven't had time to do that yet. But we hope that you take this and we hope that you pick up the ball, and we hope that you run with it. That's the objective. So I am from, and I am zooming in from occupied Duwamish territory, otherwise known as Seattle. But I'm really here in my capacity in service to my ancestors, to perform the necessary ancestral healing that all white people really desperately need for our own humanity, and in order for us to be the best possible allies to people of color in the fight for racial justice. So for me, this is deeply spiritual healing work, and again, I am so honored to be here with you all. So thank you again for inviting me. Generally within social justice work, we do not like to tell you what to think. We want you to come to your own conclusions. And pedagogically, this is not the way we would choose to share information, but given the extraordinarily complex and deep nature of this content and this format that's unideal, we are going to be teaching information to you, and it's unideal. It's not the way we normally do things, but we are also asking you to listen to what is a doctrine, and it comes from people of color. And one of the things that we are really emphasizing in allyship is listening to the voices of people of color, listening to leadership. And so some of the things you hear tonight might be totally foreign, sound totally wacky, make you uncomfortable. And I would just ask you to sit with that. It's okay. Like, we are all learning. Growth requires some discomfort, and we're here to support each other and hopefully be as compassionate as possible with each other, and understand that this is a really long process, that institutionalized racism has been building for hundreds of years, and it's not going to be quickly solved. And so some humility as well, and that don't know mind are also very helpful. Everybody doing okay? So one of the ways I like to talk about, or like to use an analogy to talk about explaining racism in our programming to white people is the analogy of a software program. We have all been running a software program that our parents ran, that our grandparents ran, that our great-grandparents ran, that every institution in our society runs, that the mainstream media runs. And it's so ubiquitous that we don't even realize that we are running this program, and we think it's the only program that's ever existed. And so our job as anti-racist white folks is to uninstall that software and to write our own anti-racist software and install it. But like any system, there's this software program has built-in mechanisms for self-preservation, right? It is nasty. It's a virus. It's malware. And which is why, again, we go back to continual learning, continual engagement, and continual diligence. This is big, huge stuff, and it's not going to change overnight. Brady, I think I'm just going to pass it off to you.
Cool. I was just going to jump in there for a second and just say that I love Emily's analogy of the computer software, because I think that we can view it as a piece of malware or a virus software that is at odds with who we are as humans, just how humans have organized themselves for most of history. But this recent racist software update since colonialism has really messed things up for humanity. And it's going to be a lot of work to undo, but we can make progress in that. So another example I can use just before I jump into my part is that my people are recovered alcoholics, and I'll be anonymous on this, but I think talking about racism and white supremacy as a white person is very similar to an alcoholic talking about alcoholism. A lot of people talk about denial being a part of being an alcoholic, and they can't acknowledge that they have alcoholism. And in my experience, these are very similar. I had to reach a point of extreme humility to hear some of these basic concepts that Emily has been talking about in order to engage with it meaningfully, because I always want to think that I'm somehow different, or I'm smart, or I've read that book, or I've been doing this work for 20 years, so I'm somehow separate and bigger than this. So I'm just going to start with that. I was in the street last night in Seattle at a protest on Capitol Hill. It was kind of aimless, I showed up in the evening time, and we're marching around with no seemingly goal of where we're going to be. And I start to notice these thoughts in my head come up, and I'm like, God, these people that are organizing this protest don't know what they're doing. They're not telling us where we're going to go, and like, we really should be at the precinct. It's better optics for the media. And I have all of these things going through my head about how Black people should be dealing with the aftermath of a murder in the streets by a white policeman. And all of a sudden I realized this late last night that I had been carrying this internalized racial superiority to Black people. And one of the main principles of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond is that we have to have integrity and maintaining accountability with people of color. So one of the core tenets of their organization is that we have to be accountable to communities actually struggling with racist oppression. And guess what? In this case, I am not qualified to speak or teach other people what racism is like. I am a beneficiary of white supremacy. I'm not a person that can figure out how to undo police brutality and white supremacy on my own. So I can just say that no matter how many books I've read, or how many times Emily and I talk about this stuff, I am still victim to this software because it's always there. I don't have a way out of it. Does a fish know that it's in water? No. I don't know that I'm in a white supremacist context and assumption. So a couple things that I wanted to start with and talk about. White supremacy and the murder of Black and brown people with no legal ramification is not new. We can think back to Nina Simone's song, Strange Fruit, the previous generation. We can go back even further. And white supremacy and colonialism is over 400 years old and is in no way new. But the white supremacy specifically, and the categorization of humans along racial lines is relatively, historically speaking, new, even though we might think that it's ancient and eons old. It's actually not. So I'll give a couple names for people that might be interested in looking this up in the future. But in the 1700s, there was a lot of different pseudoscience experiments. Phrenology would be a later example, but Linnaeus, Buffon, I think the pronunciation is, and Blumenbach. So all these scientists attempted to outline humanity in distinct races, and those races that they came up with incorrectly still live on into this day. Who's filled out a census or a job application in the last year? So whenever I do those, I'm unemployed right now, I got laid off in early April. I always have to click, my racial identification. And it says, are you white? Are you Hispanic? Non-white Hispanic? And it gives you all these really insane classifications, because guess what? None of those exist. It's all 100% a fiction. It's a social reality, meaning cops kill people based on how you are racialized in our views and our perception, but there's no reality to Black people versus white people. Quick example, so you could just, the hand raising worked well. I see mostly white people on the call, but it may not just be white folks here, so I just want to say that and put that out there. But raise your hand if you have ancestors that maybe would qualify you to not be white. Raise your hand. Yeah. Does someone want to maybe unmute themselves and give me a couple examples? Don't be shy. If you raise your hand, I need you to talk. I need you. Greg, please.
So everyone that I know from Canada claims that they have an Aboriginal ancestor of some sort. Yes. I can't prove this. I have family tree going back to the 1700s. I haven't seen anybody that wasn't named like John or Martin or something like that. But that's a family myth. Not Pocahontas or anything. Not like a princess or anything like that. But just that there's native blood somewhere going back.
Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, I go with that too. Like, I definitely do not consider myself culturally native at all. However, I took an ancestry test, I don't know, about a year or two ago, and was surprised to find that I have native ancestry in me, in my genetic makeup.
Yep. Anybody else?
Canary Islands. That's about as far back as I can go.
Yep. It's not as simple as we like to think, I think. It's not as simple as fits into a census or a job application category, for sure. I can just speak for myself and say that, before I got into this work, I think I liked to put my fist up and go, well, my family's Irish, and don't you understand there's a history of colonialism there? And I'm a little bit oppressed still about this. I want to explain it to you. And, the case of the Irish is actually case in point about how magical the category of race and white supremacy is. It's true that Irish people were the first people colonized by England. And it was kind of the experiment, the first trial run of how they were going to take over whole countries. But the magic of this is that the Irish were able to immigrate to the United States. And in a generation and a half, they went from being on par with Black people and being the same social caste to being white. And that transformation is only possible if you have this skin color. And there's many examples that we could go into, but what I'm trying to convey here is that all of our language that we daily talk about, in the news tonight when you watch it, when you read an article on NBC.com tonight, it's gonna talk about race. And it's gonna be lying to you, because we still cannot reckon with the truth that it is a scientific fiction and a social reality, that we are still living in the confines of this false system. So that isn't to say that racism isn't important. It's just that race itself is a lie from the 1700s. I guess Emily had briefly talked about accountability, and I had mentioned that one of the key principles of the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond is accountability and maintaining accountability. One of the things that they talk about a lot during the two-day training is that this isn't, as Emily said, an academic exercise. This is oriented towards organizing and getting involved, and we aren't doing this to feel good about ourselves. We have to do this work so that we can all get free. So accountability and taking leadership from people of color is exactly what I was, I think, attempting to explain when I was at the protest last night. I showed up with the assumption that I know best and that I'm a smart guy and I've done some trainings and I've, read a book or two and, whatever it is. And so that I am qualified to come tell a crowd of people how to deal with racism and how to undo it and how to challenge it and how to undo it. Well, the truth is that the only people that truly understand a system are the people that are under the boot of it. I don't understand I'm in water. I'm a fish in a fishbowl and I don't know I'm a fish. I do not know that I live in water. And that is one of the key principles of the work of People's Institute. And I think that's the only way I can think of to explain how internalized racial superiority, which is the fancy term that they came up with, but internalized racial superiority is what I was exemplifying at the protest last night. And it sounds like a small thing, but if I had never gone through these trainings or have any ability to interrogate my own thoughts, I might have gone on the megaphone and say, hey, I have something to say. I would have taken space from people of color at a demonstration ostensibly to try to address the killing of George Floyd as a white person. So, hey, I'll just play devil's advocate for a second. Maybe that doesn't sound like the end of the world. The problem is, right now, and what I'm told day in and day out is that white people are not trustworthy to people of color. People of color rightfully do not trust white people to act accountably, to act in their interest, to show up when it's important, to do the work that they need us to do. I could go on. So if I show up to the demo and I say, oh, I'm here for Black Lives Matter, I'm here to help y'all out, and then I steal the megaphone and say, here's how you got to do it, those people aren't going to feel safe in the quote movement that is ostensibly supposed to be keeping them safe. So if we don't get some of these things in place before we start engaging with this stuff, we're not going to get very far as white people. And the thing is people of color need us. They can't do this in America on their own. They need white allies to support their struggle, and they need us. And so we're going to make mistakes. I'm going to have those thoughts when I show up to protests, etc. But we have to somehow get synced up with being accountable. So, Emily, do you have anything to add to accountability?
Yeah. I was just, in terms of sort of like the current temperature of the United States, and particularly with the national attention turning to police violence and the endemic nature of this problem, I think it's really important to remember that, as we've said, like the endemic extrajudicial killing of people of color, Black and brown people, goes to the beginning of people other than Indigenous people setting foot on this continent, and people of color have been organizing against it for that length of time as well. And so for many of us, this is the first time our awareness has really that we've really thought about how deep this problem is. And because we're new, we don't have an appreciation for how deep the tragedy is, how much work has already been done, how sophisticated the problem is. And we tend to come in with our own prescriptions of like, why are they doing that? Well, why are people asking to defund the police? We need police. And it's like, what we are being asked to do is to follow the direction of the people who have already been doing the work. This is Genchi Gembutsu from the Toyota production system. This is, we listen to the people who are the experts. We're talking about a car, we're going to listen to mechanics. We're talking about racism, we're going to listen to people of color. But our programming, that software programming, tells us that we know better than people of color even about racism. And that's deep. And that's all of us. Like, I could talk about myself doing things like even this week. But that's the programming that we are operating against that we have to undo. How's our time? Are we on? Sorry.
Yeah, how are we doing on time?
I think we started at 6:10.
Yeah, we are good. We're under half an hour still.
Okay, cool. Brady, would you like to talk about the shame piece and then about concrete allyship?
Cool. So, quick raise of hands again. Who has heard the term white guilt before? Raise your hand. Almost everyone in the chat? Yeah? Hold on, I'm gonna go to the other page. Everyone? Everyone heard white guilt? Okay. So I think that that's almost a trope at this point in our culture, and it's kind of a weapon against people to be reflective about the nature of racism in our country. I've been, I'm not sure how to give this context, but I can just say this, that I don't think we have white guilt. Aside from the like sort of, you know, microaggressions or mistakes that I might make on a day-to-day basis, like I don't really have anything historically speaking to feel guilty about. However, I feel, rightfully so, I feel shame for being part of a social grouping that I know does wrong and has historically done a lot of harm. So shame and guilt might seem related or similar, and they are, I guess, but as I've unpacked that over the years, it has allowed me to finally address and to be honest about what is happening in my head and my heart when I think about my own white privilege, when I engage myself at a protest last night, or when I attempt to be helpful or accountable in organizing context with people of color. So it may seem like a small thing, but guilt, I think, isn't really actionable. It doesn't help us focus on what is actually happening. It's just this latent burden that I can never work off. Whereas I think shame, I can at least clearly see as on some level, you know, like psychically important, but it's just this healing that Emily keeps talking about is the healing work, I think, that she's been trying to mention. Emily, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I think that in terms of I think the shame piece is particularly important because previously, hopefully we're moving into a new direction, a new paradigm, but previously we've associated racism with people being mean and those people in the South and the KKK and, you know, individual acts of meanness or even violence. But, and so when we come to understand that we, even as good white people who we are into sustainability, we want to be on the right side, we, you know, vote progressive, that messes with our identity as good white people. And that's really dangerous because one, it centers ourselves when this is not about white people. It's not about us individually. It sure is, you know, and that's really, so when we have shame and the shame is what we carry, we are individualizing it when this is a collective problem that we all have the same software. Like white people respond in a uniform manner to racism. That's why Karen is a thing. And we all, as white women, have Karen. That's why I can tell you already the questions that are going to come up when we open it up for discussion. It is a system. It is not about individuals. It is not individual action. And that shame goes back to like, well, I thought I was a good person. And even to talk about being at a demonstration, like I went to the demonstration on Saturday and there's a lot of anger at white people, justified anger at white people. Like, where the have you been? Like, thank you for being here now, but we're not going to give you a cookie for you just showing up now. And I'm like, but I'm a good white person. And it's like, I did that. I've been doing this work a long time. And that was my reaction. I was like, whoa, hold on.
Yep. And I think that's well said. I think if we can clearly see the burden that we are carrying as white people in this equation of racism, then we can begin to undo it in a more cogent, clear way. Because if I'm working off guilt, then I'm going to show up to the protest and, mope around and be a soft, wet noodle. But if I know what I'm carrying around accurately, then I can own who I am and not have to be
and be
afraid
effective. Be effective at talking
not
to
be
other
afraid
white
of what I
people.
have in myself, and that it's okay to be white. It's not an inherent endless crime, but we have to take action. We have to be accountable for what we're doing right now and move forward and be a part of the solution, of the healing, of this organizing against white supremacy, which we have the luxury of being invited into. So is that good enough on the shame piece, Em?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay. I got 2 more things on the agenda. Just go with those.
5 minute, 3 minute. Is bust them out.
Okay.
That's what I think.
So Emily already touched on this, but this is a really overarching concept, and it's an aspect, I think, of being a product of this white supremacist software system, the software program that we all have been installed in at birth by virtue of being born in this culture. A lot of us, I think, because we feel these complicated feelings of shame, and we want to other ourselves from the bad white people. I'm a good white person, whatever. We want to believe that there's quick fixes and that there's a simple way to write a check. Well, I write the check, or I show up to black, or whatever it is. And the truth of this is that what we are dealing with, what we, most of us on this call are dealing with, is much deeper than just what skin tone we have. And that's the challenge, I think, that we want to invigorate and begin the conversation with everyone here about, is that this is not a quick fix. This is not in the next year we're going to get one reform in Minnesota or Seattle or wherever, and then it's a big thumbs up from here on out. The truth of the matter is that in the 60s, when they got a few small legal reforms, that was the beginning of a multi-generational process of actually empowering people of color and undoing multi-generational process of apartheid in the United States. It wasn't until years later when we stopped redlining real estate purchases in Washington State, liberal Seattle, and this is after civil rights. So this is not going to be done once a cop or two has some charges on them. This is about fundamentally changing how the fabric of power in the United States shifts. And we have to bring our own experience and our own energy and the people that we have connections with in the white community, at our churches, in our neighborhoods, our friends, our cousins, speaking for myself, my racist uncles and aunts. And I have to have these conversations and maybe not, give them middle fingers, but I do have to engage them and attempt to bring them into this, not as a condemnation, but as a human to human, like, how do we do this? We have to be involved. We all like to think that if we had been living in the Third Reich in Germany, we would have been a good German, but the math doesn't shake out to that being true. Because in our own context, most of us don't do what's required, speaking for myself, don't do what's required to be an accountable white person to people of color. So hopefully this is all gearing us towards, there's no quick fixes here. This is ultimately, I know this is a bummer, but this is a lifelong process. Even if I read 2 more books this summer, I'm still going to have the same software, and I have to be accountable with Emily. Like Emily called me out a couple months ago. We were at a organizing thing, and she's like, "You totally spoke over me, and you assumed that you knew my experience," and that really made me feel good. And I was like, "Yeah, you're right, I did. Sorry about that." And that just comes out, while we're in a meeting, because I have too much coffee, and the software takes over. So no quick fixes. And the last thing that I think, we want to, I'm not sure what the format is, still getting better at Zoom, but we want to invite people to talk about how you today, this week, since we have this amazing opportunity with white people to have these conversations with other white people, in the struggle against white supremacy in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed by a police officer in the street, which sure looks like a lynching to me. So how can we, this week, begin a lifetime of education, of accountability, of action, and of organizing? So Emily, what do you think? How do we do this in Zoom?
I think, yeah, let's open it up for a discussion. I would add one final piece to that, in saying that we also, that the lifelong piece is so important, and a commitment to racial justice is so important, because we have a habit of moving on to the next fad really quickly as white people. So while the moment right now, we are all feeling that this is a tragedy, and definitely it is, but it's about the long haul. It's about being here for racial justice next month, next year, 5 years from now. Like Brady said, this problem is not going to go away in a short amount of time, but I think let's just open it up for discussion